to jump right in. Welcome to Talk Tennis. Today we are talking all things Wilson Pro Staff 6195. Joining me is Chris, Troy, and Mark Boone. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for the invite.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
What's up?
We love these deep dives, and this is a topic that I know everyone at this table is very passionate about. So before we even get into the heritage and everything, I just asked what I thought was a stupid question, but it sounds like maybe it wasn't that dumb. Troy, you're going to be the explainer. Can you explain to me what makes a pro staff a 6-1 pro staff, or what the 6-1 signifies? Give us all the story on the 6-1.
Yeah, as far as just like the racket construction and design, the pro staff is a huge umbrella. There's been tons of pro staff rackets over the years, but to me, and like going back to some of the originals, the 6-1 particularly, the 6-1-95 even more so, which is the mold of all these rackets. Mm-hmm. When it originally, they added the 6-1 from like a 6-0 or some of the other pro staffs, it was a thicker beam, a stiffer beam, but also an oval shaped beam. Whereas typically most pro staff rackets in history have been the square, really thin square box profile frame. So it was really the frame design, the shape of it, the stiffness. I think Wilson, when they listed the technology way back in like the 90s, they called this the first wide body, like in the pro staff family. Mm-hmm. So it was, quite a bit thicker, even though nowadays this is still pretty thin. Mm-hmm. So that's some of the things I know about it.
The 6-1 Classic was a very different racket to the 6-0. Mm-hmm. So at the time we had the pro staff 6-0, and the 6-1 Classic had a really different feel. I had a buddy who played it and loved it, and I hit it a few times and it wasn't for me, and I was playing 6-0-95s back then, and I was bouncing between those and Prestiges. But yeah, the 6-1 Classic was stiff. It was a rocket launcher of a racket, because it had mass too. It was a 12-ounce racket and a thick, stiff beam, and you could really crush the ball with it.
Can you elaborate a little bit? I know there was like the 6-2 range, like the skunk rackets, and then there was the Davenport Hennen rackets as well. Is that a similar elliptical beam on those? Is that kind of derivative of the 6-1?
So I'm not as much familiar with the 6-2. I remember some of the rackets, but I believe they were more of an oval beam.
Yeah.
And they were bigger head sizes, a little bit more I would call tweener-ish, but I remember those. And then which was the other one, the 7-point? You were talking about
the N Tour, became the N Tour, right? Or the H Tour.
Yeah, the BLX
like
Tour and the N Tour, exactly.
So that racket in particularly, that one's got a big history. The one that started as like the H Tour, N Tour 2, it later became K Tour, BLX Tour. That racket is actually lived and still used to this day. That's the one that's listed as like a 96 square inch, 27.25 inch length, 16 by 20 pattern. Now we're talking like racket that Nishikori got into, but also like Lindsay Davenport, Petra Kvitova. But that is a more oval shaped beam.
And then I remember the Burn 95, you're talking about Nishikori's racket.
Yeah.
That seems like it's a pretty similar beam type or frame design.
Pretty much same mold, but when they got into the Burn 95 and then the Ultra 95, those are quite a bit stiffer than the originals.
Nice. Well, I joined the Pro Staff family later in life, but Troy, these are coming from your personal collection. So maybe you guys can take us through the history of the 6-1 rackets.
Yeah, Chris, you want to start off with some of the originals?
Yeah, so like I said, the 6-1 Classic, that was, a racket that was around when I was playing a lot of tennis back in the day. And like I said, one of my doubles partners at the time used that one. I found that racket to be really hot, like down and where the traditional sweet spot would be, like in the lower part of the hoop. And then when you got up into the upper part of the hoop, it was a big drop off in power for me. So I didn't like that feel of it being red hot in one part of the string bed and not so hot in the other part. But my buddy loved it, and he had a much better forehand and bigger serve for me, and it seemed to suit his game just fine. Whereas I liked the more consistent response of the rackets I was using, even though I was adding weight to the tip of my 6-0-95s because they're a bit noodly at the top too.
Yeah, those were a little softer.
Yeah, softer, and I had that box beam construction that I was used to and wasn't ready yet for this more sort of powerful setup. And then Hyper Pro Staff, I didn't hit it. I knew about it. I saw him around everywhere. Granville used to be here. I know we all still see on a regular basis. He used to play the Hyper Pro Staff 6-1 back in the day. But my first racket I really fell in love with from the 6-1 family was the K-Factor version. And we were playtesting it, and I had a doubles tournament coming up, and I was like, I'm just going to play it this weekend. And I used it, and we got to semis. I think we lost. We had a really good run, my doubles partner and I. And we test a lot of rackets. It's not often if we have a competitive situation that we're going to stick with what we're testing. We're usually going to go back to our racket of choice. But I was like, man, I'm playing as well as I can with this. I'm not going to play better or worse than I am with my regular racket. And so I stuck with it through the tournament. And it was a racket I really liked. And then I kind of drifted away from the 6-1 family after that a little bit.
Yeah, the K-Factor was one of the stiffer ones, also really beefy swing weight. And then I recall back in the day, we actually had an X version, the K6195X.
That was a beast.
Yeah, because the swing weight was, I think, listed in like the 345.
Oh, yeah.
Close to 350. Yeah, at a 12.3 ounce or whatever. That was a beefy racket.
I still remember that was back in the day when I first arrived here in 2007, and I'll never forget kind of an unseasoned CSR suggesting that racket to a player who had no business swinging. I think she was an elderly individual. And I was like, whoa. The X is an extended, really heavy racket. Maybe not for this lady. But yeah, that is the racket that made the rest of these rackets seem a little more reasonable for me. That thing was beefy for sure.
Yeah, I think they were correlating the extended length to like more of the game improvement rackets that are extended. And I was like, no, that's for a player like Del Potro.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Now, which ones... Was it Hyper Pro Staff where we got the choice of string pattern and a longer length version, Craig? Because Delpo 1820 extended.
Yes, and I think that was like a European release from
it was in Europe.
Heard about.
Yeah. We did have some, so back when we were 2 buildings ago, long time, we had some of those. We had a real limited number of them that we got from, a really limited number from Wilson, and they blew out pretty quickly.
Yeah, I can't recall when they added, because I think was the first one 1820 or 1618? The very first classic?
It was open pattern.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then this is the hypercarbon that's in the 1820 right here. So I think they started adding the 2 string patterns.
In the hypercarbon.
Yeah.
I think so, yeah, too.
Yeah, and that's another thing too. We have a couple here, like these 2 BLX versions, 2012 and 2014. They're both in the 1618 pattern, whereas these 3 are all the 1820.
So the K Factor that I liked the most out of the 2 was the 18 mains.
Yeah.
Just more control. I mean, I'm kind of an 18 main guy, but yeah, good racket.
Yeah.
I feel like I have nothing to contribute to this conversation.
Well,
I mean,
you've hit the new one.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. I was going to say when I got put on the playtest of that one, knowing Troy's history with the racket and listening to you guys, I was like, I'm not worthy for this playtest.
Yeah.
I don't know about that.
But also, just real quick, kind of going through the lineage, you said the classic, then the hyper, and then from hyper, I think there might have been a couple cosmetics in between those 2 series. And then it started getting into the stuff that I would call more modern, or I remember is Encode, which the Encode series had the 2 string patterns. That racket, we're talking about players, and I remember that from like the Taylor Dents and stuff like that. Encode went to K Factor.
Again, we had 2 string patterns in K Factor.
Yep. And then there was actually another, now that I'm thinking about it, I think like 3 BLXs. The first one was like black, red, and it had the gold accents. And now that I'm thinking about the racket, Tennis Warehouse racket reviews, I remember Danny Castro being on that, some older play testers, Granville.
Next up, we're here with Troy, whose current racket of choice is this racket in the previous version in the 1820. I know you customize it up a little bit, though. How did this new one stack up?
There's not too many bad things I have to say about this racket. It felt right at home, first time using it. The main difference in feel for me, I felt like initially this one felt a little bit more clubby or head heavy, but I think that mostly has to do with the fact that I have a leather grip on mine, so it makes it a tad bit more head light.
Troy, you also tested both versions of this new 6195. How'd the 1820 work for you?
Overall, this was just a better fit for me, like the other play testers. Personally, my rackets are 18 by 20 string patterns, so the way the ball comes off this racket is just really predictable and really responsive. So, I mean, overall, this racket really just sat perfect for me. And then we started jumping into these bad boys here. So this was like the black red and gold was like a 2010 series. This would be like a 2012 series. This was the one I switched to and takes me back to my boy Marty Fish, and then the 2014 one here. And that was the last one that they kind of had full production. They did a couple remakes after, just kind of bring them out like in Europe and stuff. And then we start getting into the modern Pro Lab stuff.
So yeah, talk to it. I'm like, I don't even know. I do remember this one. I started in 2013, and I remember this cosmetic. I probably was not on the playtest, assuming that it would have been you three and Granville. That would make the most sense.
I think Andy was around.
Crushing it with
Andy
a peer
was
drive
around.
back
Yeah,
then.
I was while you guys were playing with these very player-specific rackets, I was using a tweener. And then I actually, after I graduated college and started teaching, I got a Wilson endorsement and just asked for whatever played like a peer drive and used the encode that the Bryan brothers used, the green and white one.
Oh yeah, like In Pro or
Yeah,
Insert.
N Pro
The
1.
Surge,
Yeah,
yeah.
N Pro 1, I think it was, with the white and yeah, anyways. So we got lucky to get these, right? Previously, these weren't available to us.
These were Pro Lab, yep.
Yeah. We did get a small run of the V13 cosmetic, the black one, towards the end of its life cycle. And I was a little hesitant to like really jump into it and like get comfortable with the racket because I knew it was pretty limited at the end. And I was like, I don't want to fall in love with something that's just going to leave me, you know? But yeah, now that we have the V14, it's pretty cool. And that cosmetic, man, it's just so pretty.
So, Michelle, you're a Wilson player. You play the RF.
Yes.
How did this racket compare for you? And is it, I mean, did you feel like some Wilson heritage here like you have in your RF?
Yeah. And we filmed our playtest yesterday, so it's all fresh in all of our minds. I was constantly comparing it to the RF. I was shocked because I didn't think I would like it at all with the first hit. I thought it was going to be this super flexible racket, like knowing what you like, and the 1820, I was going to assume that I couldn't get any power out of the racket. And after we did our comments, I realized I didn't say anything about control yesterday, but it was because I was feeling so like connected to the ball that like it literally did what I asked of it. And I was hitting with Drew one day with it, and he literally was like, he had no idea what racket I was using. He's like, are you using a Pro Stock racket? Like that ball's coming through. I was hitting very consistent within the baseline. And it was like, no, but this feels easier to swing than my RF 97, and I'm getting the same experience.
Yeah, these are nice and tip light. They felt, pretty quick and easy to swing for me, for a player's racket.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say in general, I mean, the specs just make sense, right?
Yeah.
Like it's technically the target is 9 grams lighter than the 340 Pro Staff 331, and then the swing weight on most of our playtest frames were sub 330, whereas I know some of your RFs are like in the 340 range, maybe even a little higher. So it is probably pretty whippy feeling.
Which I
compared
am
to some of your rackets.
Starting to appreciate more. It's weird because there was another racket I was hitting that same day, also same experience. It's a heavy racket with a pretty solid swing weight, but it's a bit whippier, tip light, and it just feels like I can make contact, and then the racket does everything for me, but not in the way that the RF does, where I feel like I have to work so hard to just plow through the ball and like I'm putting in the effort. This kind of does it for me, which was nice. And it's super stable, and like literally the sweet spot felt plush and large, and I'm shocked how much I enjoyed this racket.
I thought your point play was excellent yesterday. I had a tough time retrieving those balls.
Oh, whatever. Before we started recording, I was like, Booney was kicking my butt yesterday. No, right back to you.
I mean, he liked the racket so much he was trying to smuggle it off in his car.
We couldn't find the hitters. And there's usually when we can't find rackets, someone's got them.
Yeah, where did the ones go that were stenciled yesterday?
Yes, it was me. It was an unconscious effort, but yes, it was me.
I'm going to bring you to your, current racket of choice, because you did a really good job explaining it yesterday. You kept comparing it to the Slinko Whiteout 1820. And, like, that's kind of more of a modern racket. We don't have 20 years of that.
It's definitely softer, but it's giving you the 18 main kind of, more control. You're getting a little more length-based power, and it's not as stiff of a beam. But to me, it kind of checked a lot of the boxes at the 6.1 minus the mass. So it's a little more user-friendly for someone who is a counterpuncher. I think the 6-1 is a outstanding frame, probably really targets or benefits the first strike player. But I'm more of a counterpuncher, so it's a little heavier, trying to last all day at the baseline with it. But yeah, amazing. And I was going to make one comment. Troy, did you say this run was maybe around 2013, something like that?
This was like, we reviewed it in late 13, but it was technically like a 14 release and 12 here.
So, and again, with that whiteout theme, it was 305 grams, but Chris turned me on to the 95S, which that 6-1. That was a great frame. I kind of piggybacked off it, tried his, liked it so much. I was like, all right, there's going to be another bald guy here using 6-1. Really enjoyed that racket. And that one's a little more user-friendly at about 310 grams, I think it was, something like that.
13, 3, something like that.
Yes, pretty light and whippy.
Yeah.
And it's that's not a soft beam racket. It's got some crispness to it. Yeah.
Had a little bit of cheap power coming off it. So, yeah, my experience with these frames has been an enjoyable one. And I know the swing weight's a little lower, and you said it's minus 1 gram, 331 as opposed to 332. But
yeah,
these rackets did make me feel my age.
So what's the story behind that?
I don't know.
Oh.
Yeah, good thing you brought that up. It's a funny thing is like all the old ones, as far as I know.
Well, that's even an odd gram. I mean,
Yeah.
332, why not?
Yeah, 332 gram. And 332, and then the
331.
The V14 ProLab is 331. So I don't know why the 1 gram difference is, but
And then we've seen some of the ProLab rackets come out that are meant to be customized more so, but these to me seem good to go. What do you guys think? I don't know.
I mean, this is a racket I would play bone stock for sure. I mean, the backhand slice with this racket is fun to hit. You can really use the mass of the racket. It's still got that headlight balance, so you can whip the tip through. The dent string pattern has the bite on the slice and the control dialed in, and that was by far my favorite shot with this racket. And I kind of, quite often pick a racket based on that one shot because it's one of my favorite shots to hit. And so this is a racket that really checked that box for me, and I would just leave it totally bone stock. I might throw a leather grip on it, but that's about it.
yeah.
From the baseline, it suits my slice backhand perfectly. It's got the weight that I like. It's got the tight string pattern I like, so I can really drive through and knife that shot, and that's a real bread and butter shot for me. I also liked it just from the baseline on my slice backhand, and I was playing Siobhan last week, and I didn't hit one topspin backhand in 2 sets of tennis, so I hit my slice a lot, and that's just such a huge part of my game, and this one is just a really nice racket for that.
I mean, I think most, unless you're like, the guys on the Pro Tour, like a Lajovic or, Dan Evans, maybe, I don't know, or who else, Delpo back in the day, maybe they would customize their 6-1s.
Yeah.
I mean, if we're talking Pro Staff users, I mean, it was a different base racket, but like Pistol Pete, right? Like had a ton of lead on his Pro Staff. But I would think most rec players or even high-level club players, 4.5, 5.0, probably wouldn't need to customize these too much. I mean, for me, that's one thing I've always loved about this spec. And another racket that I switched to after Wilson took the 6-1 away from me was the VCore Pro 97 330, which is Percept 97H. Almost has an identical weight and swing weight. It's easy. It's easy for me to pick them up and just go play. It's a beefy racket, but I don't need to tailor it or do too much.
Yeah.
Well, I know for a while there, a lot of people were really hankering. Like you said, the racket was kind of taken away from everyone once Fed switched from the thinner cross-section 90 to a thicker cross-section 97. I just feel like, for the last few years, we've been trying to direct other players to a similar playing racket. And now I'm just happy to say you don't have to suggest other rackets. You could just go for the real deal. And I was impressed. I think you mentioned yesterday, Troy, in the review that the ProLab frames maybe have some foam up in the hoop. We're not sure.
Troy wants to cut one open.
The weight of the racket really muted vibration, and I would say they're just some of the most solid feeling rackets, even though they do feel stiff due to the beam and the string bed. Kind of keeps it feeling firm. It was very comfortable. I didn't have any comfort issues with these rackets. The K factors, I would say, felt a little more raw. These feel a little more plush overall.
Yeah, that's another thing that's still kind of up in the air. The couple reasons I assume that or kind of feel that way is when hitting them, it's like a kind of a slightly firmer layup, but it has that really nice dampened feel. Even when we tested the Ultra Pro, when we first got that, it's a really lighter racket, lower swing weight, but it still plays really stable and has that nice dampening to it. It just, to me, feels like it has a foam fill. And then the reason I first got that in my mind, I was watching I think it was a Masters tournament or something 5-6 years ago, and you could find it on YouTube, but it's Vasek Pospisil. And I think he was using the H22 at the time, like a Blade Pro. And he just had a bad day, and he just let one go on the court and just started smashing the heck out of it. And on Tennis TV, they zoomed in on the cracked frame, and it was split up in half up here, like it was literally bent in half, and you could see the inside was totally white filled.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, oh, well, make sense. Some of the pro stocks, at least for the pros, have that foam fill. I wonder, if these Pro Labs do. So something that, could be.
I heard LiDAR works. Maybe we could look inside of it. I have to crack one open. It seems a shame to,
I know,
sacrifice such a nice racket. But yeah, I'd be curious to know what the internals look like.
I got a friend who's a vet. She could probably X-ray it for us.
I was going to say Crawford probably would love to get his hands on one.
Yeah.
No one got mad yesterday, so we didn't see any racket slips or anything.
Hey,
I think we're all pretty tame when it comes to that now. Who would you guys suggest this racket to? Even let's talk about someone like me who's not super familiar with the heritage of the rackets. Like, who should try this? And then even I'm curious to know how it compares to your Prestige Classic 2.0.
Okay, well, can we start there maybe then get into it? So I was hitting them a lot side by side, and this feels so forgiving, this 6-1 after hitting the Prestige Classic, because they come around with about the same amount of mass. I think my Prestige is a little bit more swing weight than these are in low 330s. But the sweet spot here felt bigger. And it just felt like an easier to use racket. And it was really easy for me to transition into this. And then going back to the Prestige, I was like, I've got to get my ball on the strings a bit more dialed in at contact with that racket than I do with this. Love both. This was definitely a fun play test for me, and very nostalgic one, like every time I use the Prestige. So,
is there a beam difference between the Prestige and this one?
I think this is a little thicker.
Okay, that's what I would assume.
Yeah, I want to say this is 21 and a half?
Something like that.
And
21.
I think close to it.
I have my notes from yesterday.
Yeah, but the Classic Prestige is pretty thin.
21.
Okay, 21.
21. The RF's 21 and a half.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I was just going to, on top of what Chris was saying, the stiffness difference, right? Like this is a little firmer, a little more pop to it, whereas that Prestige Classic is just a little softer flex and just so buttery, right?
Yep. Yeah, this feels like a bit more of a modern beam when it's interacting with the ball, whereas the Prestige you just feel like, this is a classic racket. I mean, they're both classic rackets, but the Prestige a bit more classic than, a bit more old school than this one.
And that's, I think, exactly what Wilson was talking about with their 6-1 technology back in the 90s or when they first brought it out with the wide body, is they wanted this to be the modern, firmer, we call it crisp, more pop, more power, versus that classic, really thin, flexible beam like a traditional Pro Staff, like a 6.0 Pistol Pete, or even like a Heads Prestige at the time.
Troy, I don't even know what your racket of choice is right now, but is this tempting you?
I know it is.
You got the
there's so
sparkle in
many
your
things
eye.
about it. Is like, I think when Chris kind of first got that Prestige 2.0 in his hands, it just feels like home. I hit some one-handers yesterday, but
Okay, there's a Granville quote. You got to use it. You know the one I'm talking about.
If
Hey,
you know,
man.
you know.
I tend to like to stay away from my ex-girlfriends. But yeah, Granville once came out. I forget what, maybe it was a 6-1.
It was a
or-
Wilson review, yeah.
If you can find the review out there, listeners, we'll give you a prize.
he had some gems, some one-liners, but he referred to one of the rackets as so familiar to him, it was like kissing an old girlfriend, kissing an ex-girlfriend. I was like, yeah, guess it brings back that kind of memory. But it just feels great in the hand, the weight, the spec. I love that this one, we have the stiffness listed at 64, so it's not too stiff. Like I know like the K factor was up in like the 68 or 69, so it's still comfortable to me. Swings nice. But the racket that I call my own, or when I'm needing something to fall back on, I've been using the E-Zone 98 Plus, the extended E-Zone for a while. And when I play with that, I'm like, it almost feels like the cheat stick kind of thing or the guilty pleasure. It's like it gives me the spin, the power. I get the boost on serve. I can spec it up to the spec I want or take it down. Whereas this can be a little demanding. And we're talking about player, who we'd recommend it to. Definitely someone that can handle a hefty racket, that likes, a lot of plow through. Yeah, I wouldn't say it's anywhere. I wouldn't say it's a really user friendly or, an easy to use racket, but for this class, it plays well. So.
Yeah, they're intermediate. So I think 4-5 on up. I think for the person that wants to take that trip down memory lane and just have one in the bag to hit with, and maybe it's not their tournament racket or their league playing racket, but when they're hitting with their buddies and just want to have fun and enjoy tennis for enjoying tennis's sake, this is a great racket to pull out and hit with, much like the Prestige Classic and other kind of classic rackets that come out. I get the same thing hitting with a POG 107,
And maybe you guys can speak to the cosmetic, because I know on the Pro Staffs, it was pretty polarizing in that matte color, but it does look significantly different with the glossy finish. So how do you guys feel about the cosmetic?
I like it. I mean, what are we coming up with terms like sarsaparilla?
Oh,
yeah,
nice.
right.
Root beer.
Some root beer.
Sarsaparilla.
I like it. I think it pops nicely to my eye. I think it looks good on film as well, on camera. So I have no complaints about it. I like shiny rackets as much as I do matte colored rackets.
Yeah, and the light, you get, the kind of color shifting that Wilson kind of has going on. And I think it really makes it look good with the gloss paint. But yeah, you go from like copper gold, and then you get into that deep kind of root beer brown, sarsaparilla, old West cowboy style. But yeah, it's just I think it's a beautiful frame.
I do like the cosmetic, but I really like that black one that we had, the 13.
Oh, you did?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the V13.
Yeah.
That was just sleek, clean. It was a no-nonsense racket with a no-nonsense cosmetic,
Yeah.
This one is, again, it's beautiful, especially when you get out in the sunlight. We play a lot of indoor tennis here at Tennis Warehouse, but when you're outside in the sunlight, yeah, it's a good-looking racket.
Hey, Michelle, you could get a little.
Oh, yeah. I got a
Fingernail,
match. How did I not do that yesterday? Usually I match my nail polish or my skirt or something. I don't know. Let's wrap this one up by talking about our favorite string setups on this one. And I'm going to, again, just put my 2 cents in. And I know Troy's usually our string guru when it comes to our playtest hitters, but I was assuming the string bed was going to be like super firm. And I can't believe I'm saying this. I think this is a racket where I actually really appreciate a lower tension. I know.
Wow.
I know.
Wow.
Chris is like,
Did someone get a calendar and chalk this? Chalk it up.
You know what? I've always said I'm a late bloomer. It's taken me this long. Okay, 1820s, low tension, smaller. Anyways.
I think those go hand in hand. The 1820 patterns, the more you're getting comfortable and familiar with 1820s, especially in a smaller head size.
Yeah, like what?
Yeah.
Because you've got more string mass that adds firmness by default, right? You've got more strings that you have to move with the ball at impact. And so an 18 main is going to feel firmer than a 16 main usually. And so, yeah, you can drop the tension down and still enjoy a firm string bed feel at a lower tension. So for me, the Alu Power 1.25, perfect in this racket. I mean, what a combination. It just felt great on every shot. So that's where I went, and probably 50 pounds, and I'm good to go.
Yeah, that's what I strung most of our hitters with, is right about 50. I even did a couple at like 48, 47 with the stiffer string, but Alu Power played really nice at about 50. And for me, I'd like the 125, but I'd be interested. I didn't try it yet, but like the 120 and some of the thinner ALU powers, that'd be really cool.
And we were stringing on a lockout.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so a constant pull, I would be down probably like 47.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was the Black String Eco Spin the whole playtest?
The new, Luxilon Eco Spin, yeah. Because that actually played really nice.
I really liked it too, yeah.
Shaped
we
poly?
We talked about it yesterday at the review. I expected to like the shaped poly on the 18 main a little bit better. I actually liked the ALU. It just felt a little bit better, better feel out of it. Felt like it was just made for that racket. Or even though I could get maybe a little easier grip on the ball, I just didn't appreciate the feel as much as I did with the 125. Really liked it.
I could think of about probably a few hundred ATP and WTA pros that would agree with their love for Luxilon ALU.
Right.
James Blake, but like tons of them that use full bed of ALU power. It's
on a good company.
Yeah, I think you're doing all right there. But I did try one of them with a gut hybrid, with the gut mains and the poly. I did ALU Power 4G, one of them 4G soft in the crosses, and that played nice. It really added a nice boost of power to the racket. Really good pocketing, like you would expect. Spin, maybe not as much bite, but still pretty good spin from the natural gut. I did a 125. I think it was the Babolat VS 17. So still pretty good spin, and I can see why. It's a touchy thing with the tension, like you talk about a lot, Chris. But I can see why some pros go with that gut hybrid because of the boost in power and especially the plushness. So could be worth a try for you out there willing to dish out a little cash.
Nice.
I always noticed that 18 main seemed to, I don't know, just how I feel about it is it seems to maintain tension better, longer, but maybe that's just because the strings aren't moving as much. So yeah, the gut hybrid, they're not going to saw each other. The strings laying and playing against each other. I would imagine it would play pretty awesome when I have to try that setup.
You tend to get a little less notching. I mean, the more open the pattern, the more notching you get. Like, I remember when we used to do was it Steam 99S, and the strings were lasting, like 15, 20 minutes, and we're using, 1.30 gauge strings or 1.35 if we could put them in it, and it still would just saw through the strings because it was a super open pattern. So yeah, the more strings you have in there, it's dispersing that load across just more strings, so a little less wear on each individual one.
Yeah, that racket was the string equivalent of a wood chipper. Even I could break polyesters in that 99S.
I can still, that was pretty early in my time at TW, and I feel like I can still see Jay, going for his big forehand and a string popping and him just be like, ah!
Yeah, he was breaking a lot of string back then.
Because that was his racket of choice for a minute, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
I remember the first day Wilson brought the blade spin, the first 98S, and we were testing it outdoors at the local park, and I remember it was Jay and Andy and everybody's trying to get more and more RPMs. I can get more RPMs in you, It was pretty crazy.
Did they have TrackMan out there?
I don't think we did, but eventually when we hit it on our playside court and stuff like that, it was all right, we can get even more spin, crazy loop over the net and stuff.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. To round this one out, do you want to run through some of the nostalgic players that did endorse at one point a 6-1 racket?
Yeah, some of them close to my heart. Like I said earlier, when I switched to the 2012, I was big into Marty Fish at the time. It was kind of like when he turned around his career, and they even did that special on him.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
His heart.
But he went from kind of like a top 30, 50 player to top 10, and really got into his fitness. But that racket was the one he was using and endorsing at the time. We have Del Potro.
Bjorkman.
Yeah.
Bjorkman. There was a lot of 6-1s being swung on tour at one point.
Way back in the day, Taylor Dent. Who are some of the other ones we had listed?
Cole Schreiber.
Yes, Cole Schreiber was a big one. I think he used an extended version.
I mean, even Edberg had a 6-1 classic paint job on his 6085 at one point. He didn't use the racket, but it was looking like it.
Hey, it looked cool, right?
Bellucci, Nestor, Mahout, Budarak, Baptista Agut.
Yeah, RBA to this day.
There were a couple females that we saw. Petkovic, Suarez Navarro. Who else?
I can even think of before he switched brands at one point, Rublev, a modern player that was using a 6-1. We haven't seen him play in a while. He, kind of injury, but Opelka is a 6-1 user.
Dang.
Dan Evans, right?
Yeah.
Dan Evans.
Dan Evans with that slice,
dirty
man.
slice backhand, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, 1820. Shoot, man, there's some good names there in the 95.
One of my favorite matches I've ever seen live was at the LA Open somewhere around maybe 03, 04. And it was Paradorn Schrischefan and Marty Fish. Yes. And I'll throw a name out there, a blast to the past, Tom McGuire. We were watching that match, and it was great. Marty handled him well, and I had to contain my friend. He was so excited to congratulate Fish and run down on the court. During the news conference, we had to kind of pull him back. But yeah, Fish just looked great. He played great with that racket. One of my most memorable live match experiences at the LA Open. A lot of fun.
That's cool.
Good old Marty.
I know. We were actually, ironically, watching the video because he's back with Travis Matthew of Marty it was really funny. If anyone hasn't seen it, it's really funny.
I still need to check that out.
I typically am annoyed by commercials. It's interrupting what I want to watch. I've watched that 3 more times last night. That is one of the funniest commercials I have ever seen.
It
So
is
congratulations. Marty can call me a scrub anytime.
Yeah. We'll have to link it. And also, I'm going to try to find the old playtests of some of these rackets and have them edited in somehow, some of that footage.
That'd be cool.
That would be cool.
Mm-hmm.
Mark, you play tested both versions of the 6195, both the 1618 and now the 1820. Give us your impressions and compare and contrast a little bit.
Well, as always, I always enjoy the play test. This racket was right in my wheelhouse. There isn't a thing that I could say I disliked about it, except that it makes me rethink which racket I'm playing with.
Next up, we're here with Mark, whose current racket of choice is the Steam 99S that has a really open string pattern. This one's got that 1820 closed string pattern. Was it much of an adjustment for you?
That's a perfect lead-in for this test. It was an adjustment somewhat. The 1820 is definitely dense. I wasn't expecting a free access to spin card. Even looking at the 1618 with the 99S being my perspective, they all look like dense patterns to me.
And just a quick thought, another racket we were talking about, like how they had like lighter versions, like the spin effect versions of these and stuff. Another, not to take any shine away from Wilson, but another racket that was kind of based or very similar to this mold, but on the stiffer end, and I know you still have some and like them, the Slazenger Pro Braided.
Oh,
yes.
Oh yeah. The
Yeah.
Henman racket.
It was kind of
yeah.
like a 6-1 clone.
It was a total 6-1 knockoff.
Yeah.
I want to say it even like it's a 1618 really open pattern. I
wow.
fished one of those out of our demo stock. They were blowing out, and I got one with a couple of grommets, and I think it's maybe like low swing weight, 310 grams, something like that. But
Yeah.
it's very 6-1-ish.
Henman's version, 1/4 inch longer. Not a
There
lot
you
of
go.
people know that.
Right.
See?
Yeah, tidbit.
Right?
Dang. We should do an episode where like everyone has to bring 5 of their like most nostalgic or like best finds in their racket collection.
Just 5.
Just 5. Limit it to 5. Yeah.
Making things difficult.
That would be pretty interesting. Everyone would have something.
It's like a bunch of X's.
Guilty pleasures.
Well, I don't know when this episode's coming out, but if it comes out before our playtest review, awesome. If it comes out after, we did try something a little bit new with this version of the playtest, and we all had a chance to kind of dive a little deeper into our chat on the video review. And then here's our Beyond the Playtest. As you can see, there was a lot to talk about. So we'll keep doing these episodes. And thanks you guys so much for joining.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks again, Michelle.
Long live the 6-1.
Happy hitting. And if you're missing any 6-1s, Troy or Booney might have them. Bye.